And in January, it turned out my eldest son, who he was in 5th year, I found out he had been going to school, but he had been coming home every day at about 11 or half 11, getting into bed, couldn't cope with life, couldn't cope with school. He was suffering severe depression brought on by grief by losing his dad. I took some time off work. I brought him to the doctor. The doctor rang the nurse's 24-hour suicide helpline. He was too young to be helped. He was just after turning 17, so he wasn't eligible for this service. So the doctor, he said, go and do exercise, do everything. We followed all the things, all the advice. He went and he played his sport. We did everything. And it wasn't working. So we went back to the doctor, and myself and the doctor begged him to please go to A&E, present to A&E. He was suicidal. He wanted to die. He couldn't go on. We told him that the only way to get access to the services was to go to A&E, because there was a 10 to 12 week waiting list for CAMHS, and we couldn't wait. He just couldn't. So we went to A&E. We went 3 times to A&E. He was put on Prozac. He was put on ketamine, I think, an antipsychotic drug. He was 17 years of age, and he was put on drugs that have warnings on them that children should not be on these drugs. They increase the risk of suicide. They make you more likely to commit suicide. And he was put on those drugs, and we were sent home. So things went from bad to worse. I couldn't go back to work. I had to take time off work. My other 2 were watching this. They were 13 and 14 at the time. They had just lost their father, and they were at risk of losing their eldest brother at this stage as well. And it was a real reality. We had a double grave, and there was a good chance we were going to use it in 6 months. And as the 4th time, my son went out. He went out, he had about 5 pints. He was 17, and he had a few drinks in March, and he came home and he was as happy as Larry. He got a Chinese takeaway. That night, everything it fell apart for him. He had had a noose in the shed. He tried to hang himself a couple of times. He told me this. This night, he said he couldn't take it anymore. He begged me to leave him die. He pointed out to a guy on the streets that had alcoholic issues, and and he said, please leave me die. This is all I have ahead of me. I have nothing ahead of me, only to be a drug addict or an alcoholic. He said, he said to me, if you loved me, you would leave me die. And I rang the guards, and I rang an ambulance that night, and the guards came. My 2 sons were out on the road trying to watch for the guards to show them where we lived. And the guards came after about a half an hour. I was physically restraining a 17-year-old boy. My brother and my father had come to the house at this stage to try and help me. He had broken up the bathroom. He'd put his head through his bedroom wall. He was trying everything to get the pain out of his head, and nothing would work. And he said to me, I've done everything you've asked me to. I've done everything the doctors asked. Nobody can help me. And he said, I need to just die. And he said, you'll get on way better, and the lads will be way better if I'm not in your lives. And he said, you'll soon realise the best thing for this family is for him to die. So we went, the guards arrived to the house. I was physically restraining him on the couch in the sitting room because he was trying to get out to the shed. He was trying to get access to a knife in the kitchen. I had my arms wrapped around him, trying to hold him, trying to stop him killing himself. The guards came. They basically said, well, what do you want us to do about it? And I said, I want you to help me save my son's life. I said, I called you to help me save my son's life. I cannot do it on my own. And I said, where's the ambulance? They said, there's no ambulance coming for him. What do you want an ambulance for? We'll bring you to A&E and drop you off. I said, no, I've been to A&E 3 times. He cannot sit there anymore. He can't do it. And I sent my 15-year-old. The guards refused to ring an ambulance for me, so I sent my 15-year-old out to the hall, and I said, will you just ring the ambulance? So eventually the guards said they'd get an ambulance for me. They told me that if he continued, they would arrest him. So I had to ask them to leave my house. Now, they did stay in the end. They I think they realised we were basically being labelled as, here's a mother who has a brazen teenager who won't do what she says. And that's how I felt that day. They asked me, what had he taken? What had he been on? I said, he's not on anything. I said, he's suicidal and he's suffering from grief. We went to A&E that night. The ambulance came. My son, 17-year-old, fit and healthy lad who was supposed to line out and play a hurling match the following day, he was brought in on a stretcher and wheeled into A&E in an ambulance, catatonic that night. But he was alive. We spent that night in A&E. I sat there in the waiting room watching all these ads. It's okay not to be okay. Ask for help. Tell somebody. Tell someone. That's absolute rubbish. There was nothing there for us when we went looking for it. It's a complete and utter contradiction, and it's hypocritical. There was nothing there. We had been everywhere looking for help. My son spent the night on A&E. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock he was brought down to the adult psychiatric ward. He was told that he would not be allowed to leave his room because he would have been in danger from other patients there, and he said to me, I'm not staying locked up in this place. I begged him to stay. He got up and he ran out of the hospital. There was a big lockdown. All the alarms were put on the psychiatric ward. He slammed his head off a concrete wall. He was brought into a padded room. Now, he turned around and he said to me, he said, do you believe it? He said, it's like Bobby Sands' room in here. This is a 17-year-old boy whose father had died, and that's what we got. He was in that room, in a padded room. They asked me to leave so they could calm him down. I left. I came back an hour or two later. He'd been given a room. There was no staff. They had nobody to mind him. He was in danger from other psychiatric patients. They had to get an agency nurse in to mind him and to sit with him 24/7. I had to bring him in pyjamas. I had to take the thing that you tie your pyjamas up. I had to pull that out in case he hung himself. His hoodie he got from Santa. I had to take the thing out of the neck in case he hung himself. He wasn't allowed. His bag was locked away. He wasn't allowed anything. He went in Saturday morning. We did not see a doctor, or we saw a doctor because he poured a cup of coffee over his head to show me that he actually hated the place so much that if I didn't take him home, he would kill himself. So he was physically examined to make sure that he hadn't damaged himself. And thank God the coffee had cooled down enough that he didn't do any damage. He was left in that room until Monday evening. Nobody came to see him. We were told there was no child psychiatrist in the hospital. There was nobody there to see him. Monday morning I went and I said, what's going on? He has to be seen by somebody. I told the doctors that day if I had known that this was what was going to happen, I would have just hired a security man to come and sit in his bedroom, because we would have been better off. Monday evening, at about 6:15, we waited all day for a psychologist to finish. The child psychologist in the Wexford hospital had to finish her rounds before she could come to Waterford. There was no one to see him. She finished her rounds. There was no sign. I asked, where's the doctor? She was upstairs in another ward seeing another patient. I was raging. I said, how is any other patient in this hospital more important than my son, who's been in here since Friday night in an adult psychiatric? He was in the acute area of the adult psychiatric ward, locked down. And I said, who in this hospital is more important than him, that they got to be seen before him? We had waited all weekend. At about 7:15, a psychologist eventually came. I asked them, what are you going to do? They said, well, there's nothing really we can do. You have an option here now. You can send him to Cork or Galway. I couldn't believe it. They were telling me to send my son to Cork or Galway, that he could go to a teenage and adolescent care centre there for psychiatric problems. I asked them, how did they seriously expect me to be a parent in Waterford and a parent in Cork or Galway at the same time? I couldn't do it. Financially, physically, any other way, I could not do it. The option I had was I could leave him in the hospital. They told me it would take about 2 weeks for a place to come up for him. So I could leave him in the acute psychiatric ward in Waterford until a place became available, or I could take him home. And I took my son home that night, knowing full well that he might not make it, but I could not leave him in that ward a minute longer. And we went home on the promise that he told me that the next time he wanted to kill himself, he came and told me about it, so I helped him get through it. The threat was that if he did anything behind my back, he was going back into the ward. And from that day on, we went home. I sat in his room night after night after night. I took him off all the medication, and I minded him myself with my family, and we got through it. We went to private counselling, and we got through it. He says to me that he will never, ever, ever get over being in that ward, that it did more damage than anything ever done to him in his life. And he's fine now. He asked me, how could you do that to me? And now he's out of it, everything's okay, and he knows now that I had nowhere else to go. I had nowhere else to go. I trusted a health service that was supposed to be there, that advertised everywhere, get help, come to us, we'll help you. There is nothing. And to be perfectly honest with you, I would not advise any parent, no matter how bad your child is, do not put them in an adult psychiatric ward. It is the worst thing ever. I brought him home knowing I might lose him. But if I had a choice of that or leaving him there, that's the choice I made. And my other two sons, he rang the hospital when I went home. He rang from the hospital when I went home one night, and he begged me, could he speak to his brothers? And I said, what do you want to say? And he said, I need to say goodbye. He said, I won't be here tomorrow. And I said, I can't leave you do that. He said, you can't deny me the chance to say goodbye to my two brothers. He said, I can't survive another night in here. And that is what we went through. We are, every one of you sitting here, any one of you could lose your partner in the morning. Your life like that could change. We are any of you. We are the kids that you pick up and ferry to JA matches, or we're all of you, and we're just a normal family, and we looked for help. We suffered enough. I buried my partner. They carried their father's coffin. And that's what he had to go through, and that was the help we got. And he turned to me last week when I told him that I was doing this. I hope you realise how hard this is, because this isn't my story. This is my son's story. And for me, it's easy for me to speak. I didn't go through what he went through. And I said to him last week, I said, I'm doing this, and I said, if we can stop one other child going through what you had to live through, something good will have come out of everything. And he turned to me and he said, do you know, if I lived in any other family, I would be dead. He said, I would have managed to kill myself. And I had great support. My father, my brother, my in-laws were absolutely fantastic. Other than that, my son would not be here. Now, he's fantastic. He's doing an apprenticeship. He's absolutely brilliant again, and he's so aware of mental health now, you know. But please, it's so important you make this into law. It can't happen to anyone else the way it has for us. So, thanks. That's really all I have to say. So.